It was a curious sight. The cat appeared to embrace the puppy. Natalie stopped in her tracks as soon as she saw these two, completely enchanted by how adorable they looked. But as she continued watching the two friends, a cat seemingly comforting a puppy, she began to worry. She didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling associated with the puppy's well-being. When she decided to act, she immediately regretted not doing so sooner. "Oh God! Oh God, I hope I'm not too late," said Natalie, running through the city with the puppy in her arms. The cat ran behind her, loudly meowing and scratching Natalie's legs every time it got close enough. "I know it's unfortunate," she said to the cat. All she wanted was to stay with the puppy, but Natalie had to separate them to save it. The puppy was breathing heavily, and Natalie tried not to make any sudden movements. However, maneuvering through busy streets while everyone was moving so slowly, so humanly possible, proved extremely difficult. "Move! Move!" she shouted. But not everyone moved, causing her to bump into people and slightly jostle the puppy. Time passed, but Natalie almost reached her destination. "Wait, dear," she said, looking around. The cat was nowhere in sight. It was clear she was probably hiding behind people, but she didn't care at that moment. The puppy's time was running out. But why did the cat embrace the puppy? Why did the puppy need rescuing? When Natalie first saw a cat hugging a puppy, she stopped to admire it. Seeing the cat and puppy so close to each other, she experienced a pleasant sensation. But within the next few days, that feeling gradually disappeared. She began to traverse this path more frequently to see how the puppy and cat were doing. It wasn't far from work, so why not, she thought. But passing by the cats and puppies every day, she noticed that the cat never looked truly relaxed in the puppy's presence. She seemed quite worried. One Sunday morning, she decided to see how close she could get to the cat and puppy. She had never been closer than across the street, and she wondered what was happening with both of them. Having reached the place where she always saw them, she realized that no one else showed the same interest in this duo. Perhaps they hadn't noticed these two, or maybe they tried to approach but failed. Natalie slowly approached the pair and immediately saw how the cat's tail became longer. Her eyes were fixed on Natalie, who was getting closer and closer. "Hello, dear. I'm just here to give you some love," she said in an affectionate tone. Suddenly, the cat growled in defense of the puppy and stood in front of it, which had fallen to the ground. Natalie's eyes widened when she saw that the puppy was lying on the ground, clearly sick and unable to move independently. She knew she had to do something, but was afraid that the cat would hurt her if she just reached for the puppy. She needed a distraction. Seeing that the cat and puppy clearly lived on the street, Natalie decided to run to the supermarket for canned tuna. She didn't need to leave the puppy for long, which got on her nerves, so she tried to do everything as quickly as possible. When she returned, the cat was carefully licking the puppy's head. Natalie carefully approached again and put the canned tuna on the ground. At first, the cat was a bit hesitant, but sensing the smell of fish, couldn't resist. It began to eat as if it hadn't eaten for several days, and Natalie quickly grabbed the puppy and ran. However, the cat clearly cared more about the puppy than the food, as it immediately ran after Natalie. The cat attacked Natalie's leg, meowing like crazy. Natalie had to jump to avoid getting hurt, and she ran a bit faster. She was holding a puppy in her arms, but it seemed very lethargic. The puppy was breathing heavily and was covered in ticks, all clear signs that it needed immediate attention. But there was a small problem. It was Sunday and all veterinary clinics were closed. Natalie was already running and couldn't stop. Otherwise, the cat would have attacked her. Suddenly, she realized that somewhere near the city center, there was an animal control center. It was her only way out. Natalie quickened her pace, and the cat gradually began to fall behind. Natalie prayed mentally that someone would be at the animal control center and her efforts wouldn't be wasted. The city around her was bustling, oblivious to the drama unfolding. She hugged the puppy closer to her, feeling its intermittent breathing against her chest, and ran past neon signs and Sunday walkers, her heart beating wildly with hope and impatience. Moving through the crowd, Natalie was getting increasingly upset because of the slow pace of pedestrians. "Move, please," she pleaded, maneuvering between groups of tourists and locals enjoying their leisure day. Each second seemed like an eternity, Each slow step became an obstacle to the puppy's survival, and she pressed forward with growing desperation. Natalie was breathing heavily as she apologized for stumbling into a confused customer. Suddenly, a sharp meow pierced the air, sounding like a cry of pain. Natalie's heart jumped, but she couldn't look back. She could only imagine how a cat trying to follow a puppy, how its devotion to it remained unwavering even in this chaotic flight. Natalie felt helpless and carefully blew on the puppy's nose, hoping it would make its breathing easier. She knew it was unlikely, but whatever might help was worth trying. The puppy's skin was wet with sweat or perhaps tears. Natalie couldn't tell. She just knew she had to keep walking, keep trying, no matter how small the gesture. Not having a clear idea of where the animal control center was, Natalie ran, obeying an inner instinct. Her head was spinning with a whirlwind of anxiety and urban landscapes as she ran through alleys and crossed intersections. "It must be here somewhere," she muttered, addressing the puppy rather than herself, hoping her sense of direction wouldn't fail them now. While Natalie was rushing through the streets, the puppy in her arms suddenly began to silently squirm. Startled, she slowed down a bit, moving the puppy sideways to examine its pleading eyes. The sound was weak, moving, forcing her to be even more careful with each hurried step she took in the busy city. A moment later, Natalie felt unexpected warmth spread across her stomach. Her face turned red with sudden understanding. The puppy had urinated on her. Despite the discomfort, she couldn't help but laugh a little amidst this chaos. This tiny, gross incident only strengthened her determination to help the puppy get the help it needed, and as quickly as possible. Distracted by the warmth and wet shirt, Natalie didn't notice the pillar protruding from the ground. Her foot got caught, and she screamed, falling forward. The shock of the sudden fall shook her entire body as she desperately tried to protect the puppy from impact. Luck was on their side, at least for the puppy. As she fell, Natalie managed to fold her entire body, thus protecting the puppy, which landed safely on the grass. However, Natalie was less fortunate. She hit the ground hard, its rough surface scratching her skin as she tried to soften the impact of her fall. Natalie lay there for a while, feeling the sting of pain hitting her scraped elbows and knees. She winced, trying to get up despite the discomfort. She knew she couldn't stay in place. She needed to get up to continue walking. Her determination strengthened, reinforced by the urgency of her mission and the quiet crying of a puppy. When Natalie tried to get up, people crowded around her, extending their hands and expressing sympathy. Their well-meaning figures also crowded close, completely blocking the view of the puppy. Natalie's heart was beating furiously as she walked through a sea of legs, trying to see the small, fragile creature she had so desperately tried to save. "Move, move," Natalie shouted, and there was panic in her voice when she stood up. Her eyes darted around, desperately searching for the puppy, but it was too late. The small ball of fur had disappeared into the crowd. Natalie's heart sank with fear. The puppy couldn't have gone far, but it was nowhere in sight. Natalie turned around, looking around the area in hopes of catching a glimpse of the puppy. People passed by without paying attention to the urgency of her search. She went to where she last saw the puppy, running possible options through her mind, but finding nothing. She couldn't see it anywhere, and the noisy street seemed to swallow all her hopes. Finding no sign of the puppy and not knowing what else to do, Natalie grabbed her phone and dialed the number for animal control. Her voice trembled as she explained the situation and begged them to come quickly. Natalie knew that every second was precious and clung to hope that they could help find the missing puppy before it was too late. While she anxiously awaited the arrival of the animal control service, several passers-by noticed Natalie's upset state and approached her. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" they asked, and their faces showed concern. Natalie spoke briefly about her situation, about her lost puppy, and about her fall, which only intensified the concern on their faces as they looked around and joined the search. Natalie quickly explained the situation to a man named Bob, who turned to her with concern. Bob nodded, understanding the urgency of the situation, and immediately offered his help. Together, they began a thorough inspection of the surroundings. Natalie pointed to where she had last seen the puppy, and her voice was full of hope, and Bob listened attentively and prepared for the search. Bob and Natalie explored the area. They looked behind dense trees, under parked cars, rustled through the undergrowth. They called for the puppy in soft and persuasive voices, trying not to frighten it further, their eyes examining all possible hiding spots in a busy city park. Their persistent search was crowned with success when Bob noticed a slight, trembling movement under the nearest car. It was a puppy huddled in the dark, its small body shaking with fear. Natalie's heart leaped with relief and worry as she slowly approached, whispering soft words, hoping to calm the frightened animal. Natalie spoke slowly, squeezing her hands, trying to lure the puppy out. But when her fingers got close, the puppy let out a sharp cry of fear and hid even further in the car's shadow. Natalie froze, her breath caught, afraid of causing even more stress to that frightened puppy. Just at that moment, while Natalie was considering her next step, the cat, breathing heavily and clearly exhausted, came from nowhere. She ran toward the puppy, standing guard with fierce determination. Natalie backed away, her determination weakening when the cat directed a stern look at her, clearly protecting its canine friend. Natalie realized that now that the cat was back and fiercely protecting it, pulling out a puppy from under the car alone was no longer possible. She nervously paced around, watching the cat that stood guard like a sentinel guarding its canine companion. All she could do now was wait for the arrival of the Animal Control Service, hoping they could handle the situation with the necessary delicacy. Natalie felt relieved when a white man drove up in a van with the words Animal Control Service written on it. 2 officers got out of the car, equipped and ready for battle. Natalie ran up to them, her alarm somewhat calmed by their quick arrival. She pointed to the car where the puppy was hiding, and with an insistent voice explained the critical nature of the situation. Natalie quickly approached the officers, explaining that it was urgent, and they listened to her attentively. "The puppy is very scared, and there's a cat nearby that cares very much for it," she said, pointing to Th. Car. The officers nodded, understanding what a delicate situation they would be dealing with. The officers took their tools from the van, a long pole with a loop and mesh. Natalie's heart sank when she saw them. The tools seemed more threatening than calming, especially for such a tiny, frightened animal as a puppy. She bit her lip, wondering how to intervene without making the situation worse. Seeing that these tools might only further frighten the puppy, Natalie stepped forward. "Food. Maybe we could try a less frightening approach," she suggested cautiously. Her gaze ran to the van and back to the puppy under the car, alternatives running through her head, gentler methods of safely extracting the frightened animal. The animal control officers listened to Natalie's proposal and agreed that luring the cat and puppy out with food would be a safer first step. They approved Natalie's idea of using something less dangerous than the loop and mesh. "Let's try it your way first," said one of the officers, hopeful but cautious about the success of this humane approach. Having made a decision, they prepared for a gentler attempt. "If this doesn't work quickly, we'll have to consider other options," the officers warned. Natalie understood the urgency and what was at stake. Everyone wanted the puppy to be safe, but time was a luxury they couldn't afford if the puppy's condition worsened. Natalie ran to the nearest store to collect her thoughts. She grabbed cans of tuna, salmon, and dog food, paying with trembling hands at the counter. Back at the scene, she carefully placed the food in a row under the car leading to the curb, hoping the smell would attract the frightened animals to an open location. Natalie and the animal control officers waited, keeping their eyes on the dark space under the car. The minutes passed slowly. The officers exchanged glances, their patience drying up as the initial optimism began to fade. They started discussing the ability to use their own tools if the animals didn't react in time. Just as the officers were about to return to their original, more aggressive plan, the puppy began to move. It peered out from under the car, twisting its nose as an enticing aroma reached it. Natalie held her breath, hoping the baby would dare to take a few steps toward safety. Slowly, the puppy headed toward the curb, drawn by the smell of food. The cat, smart and careful, watched but didn't follow behind, sensing their intention. Natalie, holding her breath, watched as the puppy, encouraged by hunger, moved away from its feline guard, and went to a safe spot. When the dog had eaten the last bits of food, Natalie carefully picked it up. It trembled slightly in her arms, exhausted but finally safe. She carefully placed it in the back seat of the animal control van, covered with a soft blanket so that on the way to the hospital it would feel comfortable. Natalie's heart broke with the desire to stay with the puppy and say goodbye to it at the hospital, but the animal control officers explained that she couldn't come. She reluctantly gave them her phone number. "Please let me know of any news," she pleaded, and her eyes glistened with tears as the van doors closed. The van departed, taking the puppy to provide it with necessary care. Natalie was left on a quiet street, and Bob and the cat were still hiding under the car. The sudden emptiness became palpable. Bob looked on, muttered goodbye, and left Natalie alone with a cautious cat. When Bob left, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling of concern for a cat left without companionship. She sat on the curb, at a respectful distance from the car, and began to wait. She knew the cat might take some time, but she hoped it would also come out, attracted by the remaining food. Natalie waited patiently at the curb, keeping her eyes on the spot under the car. Finally, the cat carefully emerged, drawn by the smell of salmon and tuna. At first, it hesitated, but then it began to eat, and when its stomach was satisfied, its caution gradually weakened. Natalie remained seated, watching the cat eat. She didn't move, not wanting to startle it with sudden movements. A moment of silence appeared on the sidewalk that seemed almost peaceful to her, which contrasted sharply with the chaos that had reigned before, as she watched the cautious animal gradually relax. As soon as the food was finished, the cat's behavior visibly changed. It began to purr loudly, and this sound filled the silent street. To Natalie's surprise, the cat appeared and rubbed against her leg, demanding attention. She held her breath, amazed at the trust the cat began to show. Encouraged by the cat's affectionate behavior, Natalie slowly extended her hand. The cat didn't shy away. Instead, it pressed against her, purring even louder. With each gentle stroke of the cat, it seemed to forgive her previous attempts to catch it, and its eyes slowly closed in pleasure. Sensing there was a connection between them, Natalie decided to take the cat home. She persuaded it with gentle words and gestures, leading it to herself. As they walked, Natalie wondered how it would react to her own cat. At home, she carefully introduced them, hoping for peaceful coexistence. The two cats surprised Natalie with their calm behavior. The street cat and her cat seemed indifferent to each other's presence, resting carefreely in the living room. It was a relief to see them so relaxed together, and it inspired hope for their future communication. When night came, Natalie prepared a small outdoor cat bed right at her door. She put a soft blanket and water bowl nearby to make the cat feel welcome, but at the same time, she didn't force it inside. She watched through the window as the cat curled up and seemed happy with its new temporary shelter. The next morning, Natalie called animal control. The puppy's condition was stable, but it was still very sick. It had accidentally eaten poison found on the street. Relief mixed with anxiety overwhelmed her. She was happy that the puppy was alive, but worried about its serious illness. During the conversation, service officials explained that the puppy needed a temporary home where it would be given the necessary medication. They emphasized the importance of careful and consistent care for its recovery. Natalie felt a wave of determination. She knew she had the potential and desire to help. Without hesitation, Natalie offered to take the puppy for care. The woman she was talking to on the phone agreed with relief to bring the puppy to her later that day. Natalie had a mixed feeling of excitement and responsibility, mentally preparing herself to care for the puppy and restore its health. Natalie spent the morning wandering through pet shops, choosing food for puppies, squeaky toys, and a cozy bed. Returning home, she arranged everything in the guest room, transforming it into a cozy refuge for the puppy that was soon to arrive. She checked every detail to make sure everything was perfect to start a new life. When the puppy, now called Warrior, arrived, beside it was the street cat Angel. As soon as Natalie opened the door, Angel confidently walked into her house, as if it had always belonged there. It seemed that the cat had decided it belonged beside Warrior, and now, respectively, with Natalie too. Seeing an undeniable connection between Warrior and Angel, Natalie realized she couldn't separate them. She decided to raise both animals. It seemed right to name the puppy Warrior for its strength and the cat Angel for its protective nature. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, filled with unexpected interactions. In the following weeks, Warrior slowly recovered under Natalie's care. Sometimes her own cat, Cinnamon, showed increased interest in the new resident. She would often sit outside the guest room door, sniff it, and make soft chirping sounds, intrigued by unfamiliar smells and sounds. When Warrior fully recovered, Natalie introduced him, Angel, and Cinnamon as friends to one another. The initial hesitations changed into playful meetings and sleeping together. A few months later, they transformed into one big happy family, each member of which had their quirks, but they were all united in their comfort and care for each other. Looking back on that fateful day when she first spotted the cat embracing the puppy, Natalie could never have imagined how her life would transform. What began as a desperate rescue mission turned into a beautiful story of unconditional love, trust, and family. The bond between Warrior and Angel proved that friendship knows no boundaries, and their presence in her life taught her valuable lessons about compassion and dedication. Cinnamon's eventual acceptance of her new siblings showed that even the most unexpected relationships could flourish with patience and understanding. Through the challenges of nursing Warrior back to health and providing Angel with a loving home, Natalie discovered strength within herself she never knew existed. Today, her home resonates with the sounds of purring, playful barks, and the pitter-patter of paws, a symphony of happiness that reminds her daily that sometimes the best families are the ones we create through love and circumstance. The trio of pets transformed her once quiet house into a sanctuary of joy, proving that sometimes life's most beautiful moments come from following our instincts to help others, even when the path seems uncertain. In the end, what started as one woman's decision to help a sick puppy and its protective feline friend became a touching testament to the power of compassion, showing that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the hearts that find their way to each other through the most unexpected circumstances.